Alright YouTube, here's the long-awaited 10th video in the occult series, the risks of the occult. When I say risks of the occult, whether it's some sort of ritualism, just general, somebody's fooling around with a grimoire or whatever, when I talk about risks, I'm not really talking about spiritual risks, because generally speaking, there are none. The idea that somebody gets possessed by dabbling in black magic or whatever is relatively overblown. Christians make a lot of it, and Muslims too, because then somebody who has one of these other effects that I'll mention will come running to them, give them money, and ask for an exorcism or something, and that's a bunch of hokum. The real risks of the occult are psychological. The first risk is that somebody in a weak point in their life, they need money, they're looking for love, they want a better job, something like that, will turn to the occult to solve their problem. And it can be the agent of their own misfortune, because even as they're practicing some occult craft, they're doing rituals or whatever, joining some occult movement, they're forsaking the more physical, the more normal, mainstream human behaviors that could lift them up to the level of success. And so they end up getting sort of downtrodden and beaten down. Because to their mind, the occult will save them. I'll cast this spell and my lover will appear. I'll cast that spell and win the lottery. It just doesn't work that way. The spiritual world is far more complex than that, and a very large proportion of all occult literature is philosophical in nature. It's not a hands-on how-to guide to actually cast magic or anything. It's really more studying things and understanding the world around you and your own psychology. And this is true for practices which aren't themselves strictly occult. This would be the case with Satanism, or even, some of the vaguely more secularized versions of Wicca. It's really more about philosophy. So the first risk is that they turn to the occult, they try it, it doesn't work for them, and they end up, homeless, they end up heartbroken, they end up suicidal, they end up psychologically imbalanced in some way. Because to them, well, the occult didn't work. Well, why? It's supposed to work, or they end up spending a small fortune on a bunch of magical accessories, and they get bilked and end up broke and don't make their rent and end up kicked out of their home or whatever. And all of these things can happen because these people essentially, instead of trying to find employment or find better employment, they instead perform a bunch of rituals to get a job. It's like that age-old joke about the person who prays to win the lottery and then doesn't buy a lottery ticket and wonders why they didn't win the lottery. I think it goes something like, oh, the person's praying and they're like, oh God, my wife's about to leave me because we're broke, please let me win the lottery. The wife leaves him. Next night he prays, oh God, please, I'm about to lose my house, please let me win the lottery. And then he loses his house. The next night he prays again, he's like, oh, I don't understand what's going on, and God appears and basically says, well, you forgot to buy the ticket. It's an old joke, and there are various variants of that. It's the same thing. You have to pair the ritualism with actual physical effort in some way. It's like somebody says, well, I want to be more sexually attractive. Well, have you tried actually, eating healthy, working out, and doing these other things to improve yourself? Not simply just sit around a circle all day chanting. The other risk, and this is an even worse risk for a minority of people, is that it does work, or it seems to work in their case, or whether or not they've followed an actual legitimate occult path and performed any real magic doesn't really matter. Let's say someone's down on their luck and they cast some spell and then they do win the lottery. Then they become obsessed with the occult, and they become fixated on it to the point of their own self-destruction. Again, it causes that psychological imbalance. One thing I've told people is that studying occult philosophy is generally good. It's good to study occult, mystic philosophy. But as far as those who want to actually practice magic, they want to perform actual occult rituals, they have to be sure in themselves that they don't get carried away with it and they don't get, sort of absorbed into this weird obsession with the occult. They have to pull, if they get to that point, if ever there comes a moment when somebody's practicing occultism and they start to think to themselves, wow, man, I'm really getting so many powers here. It's working so well. I think I need to do this more. Then they need to take a step back, forsake that line of reasoning, and perhaps take a break or leave the occult altogether, because they're becoming psychologically unbalanced. It would be detrimental for somebody to continue to practice the occult, because the thing is, it's like the concept of runs within mathematics. By random chance alone, a person could start practicing and right away see a bunch of results, all one after the other. That doesn't necessarily mean that will be true down the road, and the risk is they become obsessed with the occult, and then if it works and then it stops working, they either destroy themselves utterly, they lose all their money buying occult literature or something like that, or they waste all of their time practicing, or they go crazy and kill themselves or something. Or something else happens. They simply become psychologically unbalanced. Now, I'm not saying crazy. Practicing the occult isn't going to turn you into a schizophrenic and make you see things that aren't there, but it can unbalance the psychology. And for somebody who's already out of balance with themselves, they have a lot of severe emotions, they're very volatile, they probably shouldn't practice the occult. I don't believe that the occult is an elite little club for specific, classes of individuals. I do object to that general reasoning. Satanism is guilty as sin when it comes to that. Sin. Satanism is guilty of that as well, and it's not even really an occult philosophy. But there are some individuals who should not be in the occult. There are some individuals who, because of their own mental and emotional state, really should stay away from it, just as they should stay away from mainstream religion. Now, here's the other thing. The occult gets judged much more harshly by most people than mainstream religion. If you go to church and you're praying for a new car, or a better job, or a wife, or whatever, and 99% of the time those prayers fail, nobody really judges it harshly, because there's a priest or whatever there to tell you, well, God doesn't necessarily answer all prayers all the time, you have to wait, or maybe you're praying the wrong prayer or something, and you have all these bullshit excuses. Really what they're saying is prayer doesn't work. Or if it does work, God essentially is picking and choosing which ones to listen to, and you're kind of screwed. The occult gets judged much more harshly. If you were to perform a specific occult ritual 100 times, and none of the time you had a 0% success rate, most people would just leave the occult. But people who go to church or a mosque or whatever for some reason don't do this. They don't judge their mainstream religion quite so harshly, because basically to them it's part of being a community. But that's the thing. The occult, just because you perform the love ritual or the ultimate blasphemy destruction ritual of all enemies or something, doesn't mean that it's going to work right away. It doesn't mean that it will ever work. You may not have that specific ability to make it work. Does this mean that you have to, get all upset and say, well, my life sucks, it's over, nothing can help me? Of course not. Do you need to run to the church and say, oh, well, I should be cleansed of myself? Obviously, this doesn't work, so I should go worship Jesus. Well, you're going to have the same success rate either way, I hate to say it. But emotional unbalance is the biggest risk of the occult. Not possession, not, I used a Ouija board and now Satan's trying to take over my body. That's a bunch of Hollywood nonsense. Everybody knows it's Hollywood nonsense unless they're crazed fundamentalists. It just doesn't happen. Tarot cards do not lead to possession. Ouija boards do not lead to possession. Scrying kits do not lead to demonic possession. No, your house is not going to get infested by a poltergeist because you did some light work. That's just not reasonable to, presume that would happen. But you can fuck with your own psychology. Now, for those who have pulled themselves back successfully from the edge, just leave the occult, either permanently or temporarily. Or, better yet, study it from a theoretical, philosophical background and learn more about it. Learn it from literally an academic perspective. The people who say, well, you get possessed by the occult, I suppose that they think that if a person studies military history, that they'll become butcherous, insane, and try to become a dictator. Because most people within the realm of the occult are interested in it from that academic perspective. They're not actually practitioners. They don't actually perform most or all of the rituals that they encounter. They're either not interested in them, they look at it from a secular perspective and they don't believe in them, and so they have no reason to perform them. Or they may have a desire to perform them, but the materials just aren't there, or whatever. Like if you look at some occult paths and some of the books, so they talk about, well, make this seal in gold and make that seal in silver, and you need the finest cotton robe or something. You need the sheepskin lament or something like that. And these materials would require a great deal of skill to actually get, and potentially a great deal of money. So those rituals tend not to be performed by the average occultist. They'd be much more into lighting some incense and making a circle of salt and then chanting a few invocations. But they're not going to get possessed by doing it. The worst they're going to do is screw up their own psychology and feel bad about life. The thing is, you don't want that negative emotion. Most people want to live a positive life. And you look at the sort of things that the occult offers people. It revolves around positive emotions, positive enforcement. You're talking about love. You're talking about wealth. You're talking about, in many cases, sexuality or lust. You're talking about, a nice place to live, a nice family, friends, general luck, good things. Somebody wants to become more charismatic. They want to sing better or something. But they've got to learn to pair that, if they're performing such rituals, with actual physical effort. Because if you're an occult literalist and you actually believe in every jot and tittle of all of this stuff, and then you raise some demon from beyond the Babylonian abyss or something and say, oh, great demon, great lord of the desert or whatever, I want to have the voice of an angel. And the demon says, okay, you can have that. Well, you still have to practice. The idea is to align your psychology so that you obsess yourself with that goal and then go forward physically to achieve it. It's not just, you carved a sigil and then you just wait forever. There has to be some effort on your part. There has to be some basis upon which that occult ritual can actually act. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. Another thing, and this is loosely tied in with the psychology aspect, is curses. Curses work best against people who are already out of sync with themselves, because especially if they know that the ritual is going on, because they're already self-destructive. Chances are anybody that you would want to curse is already going to tend to destroy themselves because they're probably an asshole. And assholes tend to get run over by cars in road rage incidents. They tend to get shot. They tend to become severely emotionally distressed and get shot by the cops. They tend to blow all their money on alcohol. They tend to do all sorts of stuff that destroys them. So you can tip them over the edge simply by making sure that they know that you're performing all sorts of curses on them. That's when it works best. There's a sort of voodoo adage that voodoo doesn't work against people who don't believe in it. That is true to some extent within the occult. If somebody is completely secular, doesn't give a fuck about the occult, and thinks of it the same way that they would think about Islam, or mainstream Christianity with all of its retarded, Hebraic figures, then it won't really affect them because they're psychologically balanced within themselves. They're convinced that it doesn't work. They're not going to, even if they know you're conducting destruction rituals every day, they're probably just going to consider you completely fucking retarded. And this is the case as well, by the way, to all the Christians that may watch this, with Christian prayer. To somebody like me who has consciously forsaken Christianity, praying for me is not going to do anything. Praying that I'll convert, trying to convince me to convert, trying to scare me into converting by telling lurid tales about this mythical hell doesn't affect me at all. It amuses me. It makes me think that you're, unstable and crazy. But ultimately, it's not really enforcing your point. Actually, it's doing the opposite and just convincing me that you're nuts. It's the same with the occult, really. The greatest risk is that the user, either because rituals seem to work or seem not to work, will become emotionally unbalanced. That's the risk. If a person is turning to the occult out of desperation, like, well, I really, really need money. I really, really need sex. I really, really need a house. I really, really need employment or something, then it's not going to work well for them most of the time. And where it does rarely work, it'll probably harm them even more, because then they'll be convinced that it was that ritual rather than any effort of their own or random chance that saved them from that situation. They become fixated on it. They become an occult fundamentalist. They do exist. There are people within the realm of the dark arts, or whatever you want to call it, that are basically fundamentalists. All they do all day is chant and talk about black cats and witches and things like that, and how bad Abrahamism is. And that's really the only thing that they think about. They don't think about anything else. They don't do anything to improve themselves. They're completely obsessed with the occult. That's the danger. You don't want to become like that. It's the same as somebody who joins Christianity out of desperation. Midlife crisis, kids moved away, husband died, whatever, and they become a complete overbearing ass fundamentalist. Nobody really wants to be around them. All they talk about is Jesus all day. They think that it's fine. To them, it's completely normal, and to their inner circle, everyone else thinks they're a complete nutcase. It's the same thing. So you want to avoid that. If you are interested in the occult, you have to clearly examine your motives. Why do you want to be in it? It's like people who join Abrahamism because they feel guilty about themselves. Well, it's not going to make the guilt go away. All these priests and imams and stuff are just going to take your money and make you feel temporarily better about yourself. Every time you backslide, you'll open your purse for the church. That's the point. And there are a lot of occult movements that do the same thing. None of them are honest. None of them have any real occult power. If you're paying a membership fee to join some order, that order is not legitimate. That order is not actually occultism at all. It's simply a money-making endeavor. I would warn everybody away from any occult order that wants you to pay to get into the order, to get the little red card of Satanism or the little black card of the Temple of Seth, or any of these other things. There are a million different groups that will promise you that. They're the same as televangelists within Christianity with their prosperity gospel. Now, if they're offering you, high-quality robes, high-quality incense, this grimoire or whatever, that's fine. If you're interested in paying the money for a book or a wand or a staff or a robe or, magical scales or anything like that, that's fine. You're getting something physical in return. It may or may not be legitimate, but you've got a physical object there that you enjoy, that you want. But just paying for membership, is ridiculous. It's like a cult movement. It's not occult, but cult. And even with the secular orders that do that, they're the same thing. It's literally the same thing as something like Joyce Myers or Peter Popoff within the realm of Christianity, these prosperity gospel preachers that take a lot of people's money and then they hawk some wares on the side. Magical spring water. Get my new book, How God Can Make You Rich, or whatever. And it's not even doctrinal. Well, the idea of paying for membership in some occult order isn't doctrinal either. There's no reason to do so. And you can bet that if those orders were actually occult, they wouldn't need money. If they had that much power, my goodness, they should be sitting on all sorts of wealth. Why do they need your, $40 fee? So keep that in mind. Don't get scammed by a bunch of idiots. If you're buying incense or, crystals or whatever, that's perfectly acceptable. It's like, can't remember his name, the dude who works through the Luciferian Apotheca. It's a Shopify site. I can't remember his fucking name, and I've heard people talk about his books and how they're full of shit. I happen to use the site, and I vouch for the site on this, for its incense, because it's good quality, it smells really good, it's packaged really well, it's got all the bells and whistles, it's good incense. And I like incense even in non-occult ways. But, am I going to pay Ford? That's his name, Ford. But would I pay, $50 or something to join some exclusive VIP club of the occult? Of course not. Because it's a scam. People need to understand that. It's just like tithing at church. Only at least when you tithe at church, it's more or less voluntary, unless it's the prosperity gospel. Then they're saying, send us a $15 check and Jesus will bless you. Can't you see that it's the same thing? Beware of magical scammers, so-called, and definitely beware of your own psychology, because it can be your downfall. Do not get into the occult unless you have good motives behind why you would want to practice it. It has to be profound. You have to want to learn. Not just do, but also learn as well. And you have got to be willing to put physical effort behind any ritualism that you enact. It's like my own ritualism. If I cast some ritual to make money, well, maybe I should write a book after doing it and then try to sell the book. Maybe I should look into some other good capitalistic Christian venture. You know, it's good capitalist Christianity in this country because money is God. But yeah, be aware that there are scams out there. There are a million different scam orders that want your money. Be on the watch for those things, and don't just jump into the occult because you're desperate. Because it won't work and you'll end up fucking yourself up in the long term. That's about all. Peace out.